Hello and welcome back to another book review. Today I am reviewing a book of one of my guests that I have coming up in the fall. I have McKernan's book Wyrdcraft, Healing Self and Nature Through the Mysteries of the Fates. And I have to be honest, I was very excited to get into this book particularly because as somebody who works with Wyrd, you can see my tattoo there, this was something that I was very interested in. There wasn't really a lot on Wyrd that was outside or geared towards a general audience, that was outside of the Heathen Satru community. And so I was really curious to get my hands on this, just to kind of see where he was coming from. A lot of introductory texts about Wyrd and the concept of Wyrd and the concept of fate and destiny. One of the main ones is a bit dated now, and that's the Way of Wyrd. And so I was really I was very happy to see that this was coming out. So it's been out for, I believe, about a year now. Let me just see here. When it came out in 2023. So this one came out earlier in this year, and I had a chance to sit down with Ash for an interview, and that's going to be premiering sometime in, I think, late September is when it's supposed to come out. But it was cool to get a sense from him, kind of what the approach was with this, a little bit more about the connections. So a little bit about Ash here. So Ash is a psychotherapist, originally from California, but now lives in Maine. And when you look into this book, what I love about it is that all of the modalities that I myself trained in, transpersonal, systems theory, a little bit of Jungian is in there. So a lot of psychotherapy comes into this book, and one of the main pieces of why Wyrd is such an important system and an important kind of element of reality for me personally is because as I was doing my own therapy journey and as I was training in psychotherapy, I began to expand on a personal level my understanding of the idea of fate and the idea of destiny, and Wyrd was the only kind of concept and way of looking at it that I had found that made more sense to me. There are a couple of other cultural pieces that came into my own personal journey with Wyrd. But it's also one of those things where it's difficult to teach to somebody else unless you go through very personal experiences. And sometimes speaking about personal experiences as a therapist to your client is not necessarily appropriate. And so what I loved about this book when I finally got my hands on it was he does a wonderful, Ash does a wonderful overview of the concept of Wyrd, the concept of fate and destiny in multiple European cultures. He also tends to also connect it with other and contrast it with other concepts around fate and around destiny from around the world. And so he really gives you a good kind of cultural context. But then, and most importantly, he goes into the modalities, he goes into the exercises and gives you exercises to do, to experience Wyrd, to encounter Wyrd, to become, to gain a realization of Wyrd and how Wyrd is impacting your life. How he describes it in this book, and we talked about it in the interview that we had, he describes Wyrd as that sense of encompassing relationships and building that sense of relationship, and expanding outwards from self to encompass other. And I think that's a really important piece. There's also that sense of experiencing, and through experiencing, you get a sense of interconnectedness. Now, Ash was very candid in our interview, as I was too, actually, about our use of medicinal substances to gain a sense of that connectedness. But I think that when it comes to working with wyrd, what I loved about this book is the context is given to you to understand the exercises that he's suggesting in this book. And so I think that working through this book, one can gain a sense of wyrd for themselves, can gain a sense of understanding for themselves, can put two and two together for themselves, and begin to experience wyrd and that sense of interconnectedness. Ash was saying, and he speaks about it in this book too, that sense of animism, which I think has become a very popular kind of approach in neo-paganism and in alternative spiritualities right now. And I think that that's a natural thing. I think that that's a very natural kind of evolution from some of the things that have already happened in the 90s and the 80s and 70s. So it's really building off, that wave is really building off of what I think has been present for a very long time, but has not had language connected to it, or language that was not appropriative or not problematic. So I really appreciate that element. I think what I really also appreciate about this book, and something that I'm going to be using this now for clients, I'm going to be suggesting this for clients, is that you don't have to be heathen, you don't have to be necessarily a follower of the Norse tradition to follow the exercises in this book. He describes them and he creates them in such a way that you can come from any spiritual tradition, any spiritual background, and still have that experiential piece, which I think is really important here. I'm just looking up here, the main chapters, I think, will give you a sense of the flow of this book. So some of the experiences experientials and exercises we have here. So in chapter 1 there's an ancestry meditation. Chapter 2 there's a craft of storytelling meditation. There's pieces around mindfulness, kind of putting a pattern into perspective, so coming from that Gestalt approach. Exploration of wyrd of the mind, so looking at it from a psychological point of view, moving into then kind of a physical, and actually something I really appreciated about this was that he references Eugene Gendlin's focusing technique, which is one of my absolute favorite therapy techniques that I use with clients a fair deal. Particularly with clients who are very cerebral, very much stuck in their head, the ability to go into the body and experience the body and relate to the body, which I think is really important. So to give you a sense of then kind of what the chapters are like. So we have here part 1, which is what is wyrd. That is the historical context. He goes into the history, etymology, and the culture, and the culture of origin, which is the Germanic and the Norse and Scandinavian. And then starts to talk about kind of the context of myth and the weaving of fate within myth, and then goes on to talk about the emerging science. So really bringing the sense of wyrd out of the spiritual and the mythological and the ancient sources, and bringing it into the context now, bridging the gap between the mythological and the mythosphere with the scientific, and talking about kind of mycelial networks, and the Gaia theory comes into this too, that sense of interconnectedness within nature as an organic biological process that is just happening without necessarily well, I can't even say without us impacting it. We are impacting it, but looking at then the science of interconnectedness within nature. Moving along, part 2 is all about then the connection of wyrd and ourselves. So chapter 4 is mind and body. The chapter 5 is relationship and the environment. So our relationship to the environment and relationships within the environment. Soul and spirit and the connection between those two. And then fragmentation of the web. And that is, let me just pull that up because that was an interesting one. I really liked. So where is it here? He starts off this chapter and it says, if it's true that things are in fact only going to get weirder and weirder from here on out, then it would benefit all of us to turn towards this weirdness with an open, curious mind and to venture into it. So he talks in this chapter about how that liminality of space, how structures, when they start to dissolve, when they start to fall apart, even that has a pattern, even that has within it the possibility of that parallel path. And we talk a little bit more about that in the interview that we have. And then part 3 is all about how to then use Wyrdcraft, how to use this relationship that we have with Wyrd, how then that can show up in our relationships, how we do nature worship, how we relate to each other, how it comes into magic, so use of magic. And I think that was a really important piece here too, because it can, people who've been following my work know that I'm often very critical of the over-psychologicalization of magic. We can psychologize things to death, and often do. That experiential piece and that understanding of magic as an experience as opposed to a necessarily what you're thinking, right, is really, really important. And so he really talks about this. He talks about the northern magic of Cider, and I believe Galdr comes into this too. He talks about Orlogs. He talks about the northern context and how Wyrd, along with Orlog, it comes into the magic system up there. And then at the very end, chapter 13 is bringing all of those pieces together. So really a wonderful, wonderful, I wouldn't even say it's an introductory. I wouldn't say it's an introductory text. I think there's a lot more in here. I think that it's written in such a way, and I really appreciated this, it's written in such a way that anybody can pick this book up and gain something. And I think also, like a lot of Llewellyn authors and a lot of authors right now writing, it's written in such a way that people can pick this book up after they've gone through it and still find something new. That's the sense I'm getting from it, and I think that's a really, really cool thing. So it's also it's quite a large book. It's 300 pages long. There's over, let me see here. So it's looking like there's at least 30 different exercises in this. Everything from visualizations, from meditations. There's quite a few psychological exercises in this too, and psychotherapeutic. There's a lot of somatic pieces in here too. So I was bewildered. When I first got it, I was quite bewildered at how expansive this is. It really, really packs a punch, and I'm fully recommending this to all of my psychotherapy and therapist friends, any counselors who are interested, or even spiritual directors who are interested in having something that they can use with clients or suggest to clients. Especially that idea of neo-pagan clients or spiritual clients who are into these traditions. But again, I think that this has enough in it. This is more than enough in it that it can be applied to any spiritual background. And you can still work with the techniques, and you can still work with the underlying features here. So, Wyrdcraft, Healing Self and Nature Through the Mysteries of the Fates. I highly recommend it. I would say that this is I want to say it's a 4.5 out of 5. And the only reason I say that is that I think that... No, you know what? I'm going to say this is a 5.5. This is a 5 out of 5. I really don't think that there's anything that I would have added to this. I don't think that there's anything missing. And so I would say 5 out of 5. If you're interested in this book and you want to listen more about the author and his background, I do have that episode coming out very soon, and if I remember to tag it, it will be tagged right here. If I don't remember to tag it, just go in a couple of months and see, and you will find the episode on my podcast. So thank you again for coming and joining me for this 15-minute book talk, and I will see you in the next one.